A single spark leapt from a candelabra and raced across the altar cloth like a living thing. In an instant, white lace erupted in orange tongues, swirling petals of silk into the choking heat. The stained glass windows groaned, then exploded shards of ruby and sapphire raining down in molten arcs. Through the smoke, the bride's screams sliced the air, a sound of pure terror and betrayal. From the chaos, Jack Dawson, single father and former fire captain, surged forward, ignoring the blazing pews that threatened to consume him. His jacket caught flame, but he didn't pause. All that mattered was the woman in white, trapped and terrified. As Jack's arms closed around her, the world narrowed to pounding hearts and scorching air. He carried her into the mountain dusk, unaware that this rescue would become both their reckoning and the spark that set their lives ablaze. If that gave you chills, drop a comment below and hit subscribe so you don't miss part 2 of Eleanor and Jack's unforgettable journey. Let us know where you're watching from, and stay tuned for more scenes that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Eleanor. Blake stood alone in the bridal suite, surrounded by mountains of peonies, roses, and orchids, flowers imported at her family's expense from 3 different continents. The morning light filtered through French lace curtains, painting her reflection in soft pastels. But the woman staring back at her was a stranger. The gown she wore had been passed down through 4 generations of Blake women. Each stitch represented carefully curated alliances, quietly engineered marriages to secure fortune and status. To Eleanor, it felt less like a wedding dress and more like a shackle one she'd agreed to wear her entire life. At 28, Eleanor knew every detail of her meticulously planned existence. She had been doing piano recitals at age 4, Catharian etiquette classes by 12, and finishing the proper Ivy League degree by 22. Her summer internships at her father's investment firm were less about skill building and more about maintaining the family's image in high society. Even her art history major had been chosen for its genteel connotations, unlikely to intimidate the old money elite. This morning she'd woken in a room the size of a small ballroom, a bedroom she'd barely entered, let alone chosen. The antique mirror reflected the weight of legacy, a stiff bodice biting into her ribs, a voluminous skirt rustling like a silk cage. She remembered the hush that fell over her 15th birthday when her mother declared, "Eleanor, you must begin thinking seriously about marriage." The phrase haunted her now, as tangible as the rusted brooch pinning her veil in place. Her fiancé, Charles Whitman, was everything a Blake heir should be. Harvard Law graduate, board member in waiting at the family pharmaceutical empire, impeccable manners. He had proposed under crystal chandeliers at the Westchester Country Club, offering a 5-carat diamond that gleamed like gilt. She'd said yes, her voice echoing through the grand hall, because that was what generations of Blake women had been taught to do. But as the organist in the adjacent chapel played a lilting prelude, Eleanor realized she had never once questioned the script she was following. Even her own thoughts felt rehearsed: smile here, laugh there, feign tears at the right moment. A line in the mirror cracked her carefully polished composure. Was this gilded path really hers to walk, or was she merely tiptoeing through someone else's design? She raised a trembling hand and pressed a fingertip against the lace, feeling the contrast between the fabric's softness and the corset's unforgiving rigidity. She traced the delicate embroidery survivor's lineage stitched into every petal and let out a slow breath. It was then she noticed the flicker of movement behind the mirror's glass, a shadow she could no longer ignore. Down the corridor, muffled laughter and champagne flutes clinking drifted from the reception hall. The sort of celebration her parents had orchestrated since she was a child. Invitations dispatched to senators, CEOs, and old money scions whose names graced university wings and hospital wings. Each guest was a pawn in a legacy-playing chess match that bore little resemblance to genuine joy. A sudden knock at the door startled her. Miss Blake. The voice was crisp, professional. The wedding planner's assistant poked her head into the room, clipboard in hand. Florist says the aisle arrangements need repositioning. The aisle runner has a slight wrinkle. The assistant's tone conveyed urgent crisis, a botanical emergency requiring immediate perfect resolution. Eleanor forced a polite smile. Of course, she murmured, her throat dry, but her heart pounded with something far less composed. She crossed the floor in her pointed toes, each step a reminder of how far she stood from herself. Behind the professional facade, she felt a surge of desperation, a primal urge to run, to rip away the layers of artifice and breathe without protocol, suffocating her lungs. In the mirror's reflection, she saw the assistant's tailored skirt and crisp blouse symbols of a life she'd never chosen. A life in which every wrinkle, every misstep was corrected before it could drift into the public eye. She imagined tearing off the gown, abandoning the clergy's demands, and fleeing into the mountain forest beyond, leaving Charles the diamond ring and 4 generations of expectations in her silken dust. The assistant cleared her throat, clipboard rattling. Miss Blake. The bride is due to walk in 5 minutes. The statement sounded like a verdict. 5 minutes until the performance began. 5 minutes until she had to commit to an identity that wasn't hers. She swallowed hard, steadying her trembling fingers. Eleanor inhaled, letting the floral scents mingle with adrenaline. She pictured the chapel set against the mountain's grandeur, the stained glass windows, the polished pews, the guests seated in rows waiting for her entrance, all of them expecting perfection, all of them oblivious to the fissure opening inside her chest. She lifted her chin until her reflection's gaze met her own. The stranger in white was trembling, but not with fear of the stage. She was trembling with fear of erasing everything she could have been. She imagined Jack Dawson, the man who would risk his life to pull her from a burning chapel, standing at the doors, a beacon of courage she had yet to discover within herself. The knock came again, firmer. "Miss Blake, the minister is ready." Eleanor placed a hand over her heart, feeling its hammering urgency. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Instead, she let the silence stretch, a silent declaration that something had changed. Her future was no longer fixed. With a steadiness that surprised her, Eleanor lifted her veil and set it aside. She stepped back from the mirror, dusting unseen motes from the antique frame. The assistant frowned. "Miss Blake?" But Eleanor shook her head gently as though waking from a dream. "I'm ready," she said. Not the ready scripted for tradition, but the ready born of choice. As she walked toward the door, the corset's bite became a distant memory. The orchid's fragrance shifted from a symbol of legacy to a reminder that life's most beautiful moments are the ones we choose for ourselves. With each step, Eleanor reclaimed the narrative written over generations, and for the first time she would write her own. Jack Dawson's old Ford rumbled up the winding mountain road, pastel bouquets and ferns stacked neatly in the bed behind him. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her legs dangling just above the worn floor mat sketchbook perched on her lap as she shaded in a row of pine trees. It was early afternoon, the sun dappled through towering evergreens, and the gravel crunch of the chapel's private drive was a familiar comfort. Jack had made this run countless times since trading his captain's helmet for a flower truck, and the routine felt like a warm blanket of normalcy, a gift he could still give his daughter after losing her mother. He shifted the truck into park and popped the tailgate, inhaling the scent of fresh blooms, lavender, eucalyptus, and the pale blush of peonies. The chapel sat a stone's throw ahead, a whitewashed timber building with cross-cut windows and a cedar shingle roof that glowed in the afternoon light. It had been decades since anyone had worshipped under its rafters, but weddings had breathed new life into its silent pews. Today's ceremony was for a family of 4 generations, another page in the chapel's storied history. Lily looked up from her drawings. "Can I help Dad?" she asked, already sliding out of the truck with her sketchbook tucked under one arm. Her sneakers scuffed the gravel as she bounded around to his side. Jack smiled at her eagerness. Before the fire, bedtime stories and homework had defined his evenings. Now flower arrangements and delivery schedules gave him purpose, and a way to stay present for Lily in a life defined by loss. He handed her a bundle of white roses and a coil of ribbon. "You're the best assistant a dad could ask for," he said, fastening his cap more securely. Lily beamed, arranging the roses in a simple glass vase just inside the chapel's entrance. Jack lifted the heavier arrangements, a frame of ferns circled with hydrangeas and dahlias, and carried them to the front row of pews, humming a melody he'd once played on piano before the world had grown too heavy. The chapel door was slightly ajar, and Jack paused to push it open the rest of the way. A hush of dust motes drifted through the beam of sunlight, dancing like tiny angels. Everything looked as it should, the wooden aisle runner, the white aisle chairs, the flower girl's petals lined up like pearls waiting to be scattered. He checked his watch, 15 minutes until guest arrival, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Despite dinner rushes and endless paperwork, he was proud of this small business he'd built, Mitchell's Mobile Flowers, where each bouquet came with a side of kindness and reliability. Lily stepped out to adjust a spray of baby's breath, and Jack turned to lift another arrangement, when a crackle broke the calm. Like a distant branch snapping underfoot, it registered first in his chest, an echo from a life he'd tried to leave behind. His veteran's ears spiked at the wrong sound, then a louder pop, more insistent, as if wood and glass were colliding in protest. Dad Lily called pencil stilling on her sketchbook page. She looked to the windows where sunbeams should have streamed in unhindered. Instead, there was a flicker, an orange glow that washed across the whitewashed walls. Jack's heart lurched. He set the vase down with a clatter that sounded too loud in the hush. "Stay here," he said, voice tight but controlled as he strode back to the door. Flames licked at the rafters near the altar, tendrils of smoke curling around pews and drifting toward the back. They weren't supposed to be in here. Wiring had been redone just last week. Weddings weren't supposed to end in disaster. Lily backed away to eyes wide, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Jack turned to her, the ribbons in his hairbrush trembling as he knelt to meet her gaze. "I've got you," he said, voice steady but urgent. "Go to the truck. Lock the doors, call 911, and wait for me there." She hesitated only a heartbeat before slipping past him, small feet pounding out the chapel doors onto the sunlit lawn. Jack inhaled, tasting smoke and fear. His jacket, once crisp and bright, was already streaking with soot. Memories of his captain's uniform pressed in the pager, crackling to life, the roar of sirens, the precision of every drill. He'd promised himself he'd never have to face that terror again. But the chapel's flames didn't care about promises. He dashed down the center aisle, pushing through a cloud of ashes. The altar was engulfed orange ribbons of fire, dancing among the hymnals and the carved lectern. Jack's boots scuffed the wooden floor, and every step pounded like a drumbeat of survival. He reached the first pew, where a toppled frame blocked the bride's path. Here, Eleanor Blake, glittering in her heirloom gown, was pinned. One arm trapped under a snapped beam, her face pale and frantic. She twisted, tears streaking her cheeks, and tried to push the pew away. Flames crawled up the hymnbook rack behind her, sparks drifting like falling stars. Jack's blood pounded, not with panic, but with purpose. He slipped off his jacket and laid it over her head to shield her from heat and embers. "Hold on!" he shouted, voice echoing through the chapel's rafters. "I've got you!" He braced himself against the pew-dampened cloth, slipped under his shoulder for grip, and with one heave rolled the wood free. Eleanor's cry of relief was muffled but fierce as Jack bent to free her arm, wincing at the blistering heat. He moved fast, every muscle honed by years of rescue missions. He hoisted her to his shoulder in the fireman's carry, an instinct as reflexive as breathing, and navigated the burning walkway. Red embers spattered at his heels as he stepped onto the chapel's threshold, dragging Eleanor into the afternoon light. He lay her down gently on the dewy grass, smoke curling around their silhouettes, and whipped out his phone. Lily's frantic dialing illuminated the screen as Jack cradled Eleanor, checking for burns, listening for shallow breaths. As Lily's voice crackled through the speaker, "They're on their way, Dad!" Jack pressed a clean hand to Eleanor's shoulder, soot smudging her lace. She looked up, eyes wide with shock, not fear. In that look, Jack saw more than a bride saved from flame. He saw a woman awakening to a life she hadn't chosen, and a father proving that even when life burns you down, you can rise again. Jack rose to his feet, scanning the chapel, as distant wails of sirens drew nearer. The white petals scattered across the grass, untouched by ceremony or tradition, now glowed with a new promise that sometimes when the world ignites around you, heroism and hope can be reborn from the ashes of expectation. Jack inhaled a lungful of acrid smoke as he slammed through the chapel doors, the frame groaning beneath his shoulder. His uniform, once crisp and clean, was now smeared with dust, soot, and an unwelcome sting of embers. The roar of the fire hit him like a freight train, heat rolling out in waves that made his skin crawl. He blinked against the black veil of smoke and the hot ash that floated through the air like sinister snowflakes. For a heartbeat, the sanctuary he'd known, soft hymns, stained glass, glowing in peaceful colors, was gone, replaced by a hell of crackling wood and flickering shadows. His boots crunched over half-melted hymnals and splintered pew ends. Flames licked along the sides of carved oaken benches, sending rivulets of fire snaking down toward the aisle runner. The rich scent of burning cedar assaulted Jack's senses, a reminder of the fire that had claimed his wife's life, a memory he'd tried to bury in every corner of this mountain town. But memories were nothing in the face of danger. He had a job: find the bride and get her out. He dropped to one knee beside the first overturned pew where a half-burnt guest program smoldered. The firelight revealed Eleanor Blake's silhouette slumped beneath the wreckage, her white gown already flecked with soot and ash. She looked as if she'd been carved from marble, pale, statuesque, yet trembling in a frozen hush of terror. Jack's heart constricted at the sight, but he refused to think about his own burned-out hopes or the daughter waiting in the truck. Right now, there was only Eleanor. "Miss Blake," he called, voice rough from smoke but loud enough to cut through the roar. He pushed forward, dropping his jacket to protect her from cascading embers. The fabric crackled as he spread it over her head and shoulders, a makeshift shield against the inferno. Eleanor flinched, her eyes blinking open wide and terrified, as though she'd been drowning in darkness. She tried to lift herself, but the beam's weight pinned her arm against the floor. Jack heaved at the pew's fractured edge, bracing his foot against a pew leg and pulling backward with every ounce of strength he'd honed during a decade of fire rescue. He could feel the wood give beneath his hands, a groan of surrender that echoed through the chapel's charred rafters. With a final tug, the bench slid free, and Eleanor tumbled into Jack's waiting arms. He gripped her waist, pressing her close so the heat of his own body could ward off the chill of shock that hung around her bones. A wall of flame threatened to cut off his path, but Jack didn't hesitate. He pivoted on his heel and sprinted toward the exit, knees bending to absorb the uneven floor. Smoke stung his eyes and pooled in the back of his throat, each breath a battle. He extended one arm over Eleanor's head, guiding her through the haze, while the other secured her waist. The chapel seemed to move in slow motion, flames dancing along pews, embers drifting like angry fireflies. Eleanor's frightened gaze locked on his back. She reached up, twisting the charred cloth of his jacket in her small hand. Jack's mind switched to autopilot. Count the steps, he told himself, step 1, step 2, step 3, until the double doors loomed ahead. He could feel the heat intensifying, as though the entire building were a furnace intent on consuming everything in its path. He pitched forward, bracing against the doorframe as he thrust Eleanor outside. The sudden rush of cold mountain air felt like salvation, cutting through the smoke and clearing his lungs. He laid her carefully on the dew-kissed grass, the late afternoon sun, a welcome light after the darkness of flame and ash. Eleanor coughed, her chest heaving as she fought to clear her lungs of smoke. Jack pressed a hand to her shoulder, eyes scanning her for injuries, a burned cheek, bruised ribs, anything more serious than shock. She looked at him, the silver-inlaid stones of her necklace glinting in the dying light. "Thank you," she rasped, voice barely a whisper, as though medical care was secondary to the simple fact she was alive. Jack nodded, heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. "You're safe now," he said, crouching beside her. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and dampened it with water from a leather canteen he always carried. He pressed it gently to her forehead, wiping smudges of soot from her hairline. His rough fingertips left streaks of gray ash along her skin, but she didn't flinch. She let him tend to her, a silent trust unfolding between them amid the aftermath of chaos. Behind them, paramedics and local firefighters arrived in a flurry of activity, sirens, blaring hoses, unfurling orders shouted above the din. Jack gave Eleanor's hand a squeeze, half to reassure her, half to steel himself. He rose to his feet, bracing against the world that had snapped into focus, the chapel's facade, hailed by tongues of flame. The crisp mountain air laced with smoke, the worried faces of onlookers gathered beyond the safety perimeter. "Jack?" The voice, urgent and familiar, belonged to Lily, who sprinted across the lawn, sketchbook thrown aside. Her pigtails bobbed wildly as she skidded to a halt beside him. Before Jack could answer, she reached him, eyes brimming with tears. She pointed to Eleanor, then at her father. "You saved her, Daddy," she said, voice cracking. "You're a hero." Jack knelt to gather her into his arms, brushing her hair back gently. She pressed herself against his chest, small body trembling. He placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "She's been through enough," he said. "Let's get her medical care." The paramedics descended, sliding a board beneath Eleanor's knees. One of them placed an oxygen mask over her face, and she nodded gratefully, trusting their professionalism. Jack held Lily's hand as they stepped back. The chapel doors fell inward, collapsing under the blaze's fury. A firefighter trained a hose at the base of the walls, water hissing as it met the conflagration. Jack watched the scene with a heavy heart. Years ago, he'd led rescue missions in city infernos, but this blaze felt different, personal, loaded with echoes of past tragedies. Yet here he was diving into flame to save a stranger, and in doing so igniting a spark of possibility that life could still surprise him. He turned to look at Eleanor as she was guided toward an ambulance. She caught his eye, and through the mask's plastic shield offered a shaky thumbs up. In that gesture was gratitude, confusion, and perhaps a dawning recognition that she had a choice to continue living a life scripted by tradition or to embrace something unknown forged in the crucible of crisis. Lily tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Can we stay and watch?" she asked, half excitement, half worry. Jack looked at his daughter, her sketchbook splayed on the grass, pages fluttering in the breeze like white butterflies. He ruffled her hair. "Let's go get a warm blanket and wait for her," he said. Hand in hand, they walked toward the parking area, leaving the chapel to its battle with fire and fragments of stained glass. Their footsteps echoed on the gravel, a soft counterpoint to the sirens that still wailed. Jack glanced back once, watching as Eleanor's ambulance disappeared down the mountain road. Each turn of its wheels a promise of recovery, and perhaps the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. In the fading light, father and daughter moved forward together, carrying hope born from smoke and courage ignited in the heart of the inferno. Jack's hands trembled with the force of urgency as he grabbed the edge of the burned bench and flung it aside. It crashed against the chapel's scorched floorboards, sending a spray of embers swirling in the heavy air. He reached for Eleanor's arm, warm against the jagged wood, and swept her into his chest. The heat pressed against them, a living thing roaring with ferocity, but Jack refused to let it stop him. He shrugged off his jacket with one practiced motion and draped it over Eleanor's head, the thick fabric catching falling sparks and shielding her delicate face from the worst of the blaze. Each step through the inferno was agony. Jack could feel the soles of his boots burn beneath him as he ran the gauntlet of flame, the darkness of smoke clinging to his lungs like wet cloth. But adrenaline lent him strength. He moved as though underwater limbs slow to his perception, but swift enough to outpace the hungry blaze. Eleanor's arms were wrapped around his neck, her weight both light and heavy as emotion. He heard her ragged breath and the soft whimper of shock, and that sound drove him onward like a lifeline. He stumbled over a fallen pew leg, nearly losing his grip, but Jack caught himself against a charred column, the cracked wood threatening to collapse beneath his elbow. He paused for a breath, the smoke so thick he could taste ash on his tongue. Then he counted his steps, 1, 2, 3, until the chapel doors were within reach. The world behind him was a furnace. Ahead lay salvation. He burst through the doorway in a spray of sparks, the cool mountain air slamming into him like a wave. The sudden chill made him gasp, and Eleanor's head lolled back, her curls billowing around the jacket he'd wrapped around her. Outside sunlight cut through drifting smoke, painting the grass in harsh contrast to the flames that still licked the chapel's eaves. Jack lowered Eleanor gently onto the damp grass and knelt beside her, pressing a fist to his chest, as though steadying a wild drumbeat. "Breathe," he urged, his voice hoarse but firm, as he peeled the jacket away from Eleanor's face. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but alive, tracking the swirl of the leaves overhead. Jack brushed soot from her forehead, with the pad of his thumb, careful not to disturb the lace that clung to her shoulders. "You're safe," he said, though neither of them believed it until the world outside felt undeniably real. The scent of pine and earth, the distant echo of sirens, and the gentle rush of wind through the trees. Eleanor coughed a wet, rattling sound, and Jack reached for his canteen, pressing the spout to her lips. She drank greedily, head lolling back as water trickled down her chin. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, checking for burns or cuts. There was a bruise forming along her collarbone and a shallow gash on her forehead. Nothing a tourniquet or gauze couldn't tame, but enough to remind them how close the fire had come. He tore a strip from the inside of his uniform and pressed it lightly to her forehead, then draped his jacket once more over her shivering form. In the distance, Lily's frantic footsteps crunched over gravel. Jack looked up to see her sprinting across the lawn, her sketchbook abandoned at the chapel steps. Her face was streaked with tears and soot, but her eyes were aflame with relief when she reached her father's side. "Dad," she cried, throwing her arms around his waist. Jack wrapped an arm around her, drawing her close. She buried her face in his chest, her sobs muffled against his fire-worn jacket. "I'm okay," he murmured, though the words felt as fragile as the lace still drifting from Eleanor's dress. He glanced back at Eleanor, whose eyelids had fluttered closed again, exhaustion pulling at her. In that moment, Jack realized how fragile life could feel, how a single spark could destroy everything you knew, and how a single rescue could ignite something entirely new. Sirens converged on the scene in a crescendo of urgency. Firefighters in full gear and paramedics with stretchers poured out of their vehicles, water hoses spraying the chapel's flank, drowning the stubborn orange flickers until the wood surrendered. Jack rose to his full height, miles and memories away from the man who once led rescue teams through raging infernos. Now he stood as a father, an everyman hero, black soot marking his cheek like a warrior's badge. Lily peered from behind him, wide-eyed, and Jack offered her a reassuring nod before kneeling beside Eleanor once more. One of the paramedics knelt next to him, voice calm and professional. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" Jack pointed at the chapel. "Wiring fault," he said, though he'd have to let the investigators determine the cause. "She was trapped under that pew," he added, gesturing where the charred beam lay. The paramedic nodded and flashed a gentle smile. "We've got her," she said. "Let's get her into the ambulance and checked out." Jack stepped back respectfully as they lifted Eleanor onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. He caught her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Her eyes fluttered open and she managed a weak nod. He pressed his gloved lips to her knuckles. "You're going to be fine," he promised. The paramedics eased her toward the ambulance, and Lily watched with silent concentration, imagining every detail she would later sketch. She turned to Jack, her expression solemn beyond her years. "Can I ride with her?" she asked. Jack hesitated. The paramedic beside him smiled kindly. "If she's stable, we can make room," she said. Jack nodded, relief flooding him. "Thank you." He lifted Lily into his arms and carried her to the ambulance, where she climbed in beside Eleanor. Before the doors closed, Jack pressed a kiss to Lily's damp hair. "Be brave," he whispered. Lily nodded, gripping Eleanor's hand gently. Standing alone on the lawn, Jack watched the ambulance's taillights fade as it wound down the mountain road. The echo of its siren lingered, a fading heartbeat in the evening air. He took a deep breath, tasting the smoke on his tongue and the pine on his lips. The chapel's flames had dimmed now, black smoke curling into the sky like a dark banner. Firefighters moved among the rubble, their hoses still drenching the dying embers. Lily's voice came through the ambulance's open window as the emergency team paused to let her speak. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, and Jack's chest tightened with emotion. He nodded, voice thick with pride and relief. "Anytime, kiddo." He turned from the scene, stepping over fallen petals and charred timbers, leaving the chapel's ruined grandeur behind. The mountain air was cool against his scorched uniform, a balm for the burn of memories. Jack looked up at the tall pines swaying in the dusk light and felt a surge of gratitude for second chances, for the chance to protect again, and for the bond between father and daughter that made every sacrifice worthwhile. As he walked back to his flower truck, its faded white paint streaked with soot, Jack whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Eleanor was alive. Lily was safe. And though the world around him had been transformed by fire and the embers of that inferno, he found a spark, a renewed promise to face whatever came next, heart ablaze with the courage of rescue and the hope of new beginnings. Paramedics moved like a well-oiled machine, leaning into the chaos with practiced calm. One knelt beside Eleanor's stretcher, checking her vitals with a gentle professionalism. Another secured the oxygen mask and adjusted the IV drip. The ambulance's red lights pulsed against the mountain shadows as its doors swung closed, sealing Eleanor inside a cocoon of hurried hope. At the edge of the gravel parking lot, reporters jostled for position. Cameras flashed in erratic staccato, capturing every drip of sweat on Jack Dawson's soot-streaked uniform, every tremor in Lily's small frame as she stood clutching her father's pant leg. A microphone thrust forward. "Sir, are you her father? Can you describe what you saw?" Jack shook his head, lips pressed thin. He wrapped an arm around Lily and guided her away from the glare, but the questions followed voices crashing around them like angry waves. Then Eleanor's family appeared, moving through the crowd in a storm of silk and panic. Her mother, Priscilla Blake, trailed a pale mink stole behind her face, ashen beneath heavy makeup. She pressed a cashmere blanket into the paramedic's hands as though it were a lifeline. She's so cold, Priscilla hissed, voice trembling between outrage and despair. Why didn't they get her out sooner? Who is responsible? Her words cut through the reporter's chatter, bringing them all to a hush. Standing beside her, Eleanor's father, Harrison Blake, was a portrait of controlled fury. His tailored suit was impeccable, even now stained in places by falling ash and splashes of water from the fire hoses. He barked orders at the fire chief, his tone more familiar than welcoming. I want a full report on my daughter's condition, a statement for the press, and someone to cover this up before it becomes a scandal. The chief murmured apologies, his eyes flicking with the deference one showed a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, not battling blazes. Charles Whitman, Eleanor's fiancé and Harvard law graduate, hovered at the edges of the swirl's cell phone, pressed to his ear. His tuxedo was untouched by soot. His expression was carefully neutral, as though he were negotiating a merger rather than reacting to mortal peril. He glanced at his watch, then at the photographers before returning to his call. Eleanor's grandmother, clutching her pearls, dabbed a lace handkerchief at her eyes, whining about ruined heirlooms and the implications for family prestige. Through all of it, Eleanor remained silent, anchored to a single focal point, Jack Dawson. His face smeared with black soot and flecks of ash shone with something Eleanor recognized as pure intent. He'd risked everything, his safety, his peace of mind, his daughter's comfort, to carry her out of a burning chapel as though she were the only person in the world who mattered. He hadn't asked her name, her pedigree, or her bank account balance. He'd simply saved her life. Jack knelt beside Lily, brushing ash from her cheek. She looked up at him, eyes wide with both pride and fear. He offered her a tentative smile and ruffled her hair, his hand still trembling. A photographer caught the moment's tenderness and snapped a photo capturing a single frame of what real devotion looked like in a world obsessed with appearances. Paramedics finished securing Eleanor's stretcher and opened the ambulance doors. The mother rushed forward, blanket in hand, ready to smother her daughter in luxury, but Eleanor held up a hand, stopping her. She struggled to sit up, her voice raw. "I'm okay," she rasped, looking first to Jack, then to her parents. In that moment, the chasm between duty and love cracked wide open. Harrison took a step forward, ready to usher his daughter into protective custody, but Eleanor shook her head. Priscilla's fingers twitched at her stole torn between relief and social protocol. Charles closed his phone and approached, offering a stiff smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll get you to the hospital," he said mechanically, reaching for her arm but hesitating when Eleanor's gaze swept past him to rest once more on Jack. Tears glinted in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't meant for Charles or her parents or the paramedics. It was meant for Jack, whose jacket she clutched like a lifeline. Lily saw it too, her small face lighting up with the certainty that her father wasn't just a delivery driver, he was a hero. Jack rose slowly, meeting Eleanor's eyes with a nod that said everything words could not. He tipped his cap to her parents in a silent show of respect before turning to Lily. "Let's go home," he said, voice steady but soft. Lily slid her hand into his, and they began to walk away from the tableau of silk and flashing cameras, leaving behind a world in which prestige had nearly cost a life, and stepping toward a world defined by genuine courage and the unspoken bond between rescuer and rescued. Eleanor sat on the edge of the ambulance stretcher, jacket bunched beneath her like a shield as the paramedic pressed a blood pressure cuff around her arm. The sun had dipped low behind the pines, and the rushing echo of carbon monoxide-tinged air still throbbed in her lungs. A young doctor knelt beside her, stethoscope poised. "You need to go to the hospital," he said, voice calm but insistent. "Smoke inhalation can be deceptive. Complications can arise hours from now. It's protocol." Eleanor closed her eyes, thinking of the antiseptic smell of the Blake family estate's grand hallway, the way her mother's pearls had clicked against marble floors as she paced. She imagined the sterile white of some distant ER, the whispering nurses, the prying questions about insurance and bed assignments and press releases. Slowly, she shook her head. Lily's small hand slipped into hers. Her daughter's fingers were warm and real, a tether to this unvarnished world of pine-scented air and honest danger. "I'm not going to the hospital," Eleanor whispered, lifting her gaze to the doctor's worried eyes. "I need to breathe the air that saved me." Her voice trembled, but carried a steel she'd never heard in herself before. The doctor exchanged a glance with the paramedic, as though weighing the urge to argue against the trauma he'd just witnessed. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said, clipping the cuff. "But promise me you'll monitor yourself. Any dizziness or chest pain, you head straight in." Eleanor let out a breath. Jack was waiting outside, leaning against his battered Ford pickup, soot and ash thinning out the pastel paint on the hood. Lily sat perched on the passenger side door, sketchbook abandoned and legs swinging freely. The truck's scent oil leather fresh-cut flowers wafted through the open ambulance door. Eleanor imagined sliding into that worn bench seat, pressing her back against the cool metal, and letting the wind in her face chase away the last embers in her lungs. Her mother hurried forward in a rush of silk and pearls, clutching Priscilla Blake's ever-ready velvet cape against the night chill. "Eleanor, sweetheart, you can't," Priscilla began, voice high and tight. Eleanor stood, ignoring the stiffness in her injured arm. "Please," she said gently but firmly, "let me decide." Her mother's eyes brimmed with shock and something like betrayal. Harrison Blake stepped in, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "You can't just refuse medical attention," he said, voice edged with panic and indignation. "This is your fiancé's and your family's responsibility." Charles, stepping from the shadows in his pristine tuxedo, gave Eleanor a look that might have been concern or calculation. "We'll arrange for a private suite," he offered, though his tone suggested he was more interested in controlling the story than in her welfare. "You'll have the best doctor's top-of-the-line care." Eleanor's chest tightened at the word care, so formal and hollow, it felt like another piece of the gilded cage she'd spent her life inhabiting. She turned away from him toward Jack and Lily. Lily's eyes shone with unshed tears, a boyish grin beneath soot-streaked cheeks. "Can we go now?" the child asked. Jack's hand went to her shoulder, steadying her in the swirl of familial tension. He gave Eleanor a quiet nod. "You ready?" he asked, voice low. Eleanor took a breath that caught in her throat, then tipped her head in agreement. She slid between the paramedics, brushing past the flutter of satin skirts and the clicking of heels. Priscilla reached out as though to stop her, but Eleanor stepped away, the cool air of the mountain night wrapping around her like an ally. She placed her hand on Jack's truck door and looked back at the chapel, where the once pristine wood now smoldered in orange tongues of dying flame. In those flickers, she saw her old life dissolving. Jack opened the truck door for her. She lowered herself onto the vinyl bench seat, wincing slightly as her bruised ribs pressed against the edge. Lily hopped in beside her, patting the seat cushion with childlike solemnity. Jack climbed in and closed the door with a soft thunk, sealing out the rest of the world. The engine rumbled to life, and for a moment the only sound was the comforting low hum of the motor. Jack shifted into gear and rolled forward, headlights illuminating the curve of the mountain road. The ambulance and its entourage of sedans and SUVs fell away behind them, headlights receding like distant stars. Eleanor pressed her palm against the cool window, tracing the path they'd come where tradition and privilege had tried to cage her. Now that path trailed behind them, replaced by a ribbon of moonlit asphalt winding through whispering pines. Lily leaned over and whispered, "I'm glad you chose this." Her small voice held gratitude and awe. Eleanor smiled, tears wetting the rims of her eyes. "So am I," she replied, voice thick with relief. For the first time, she felt the weight of choice settle into her bones as something to cherish, not to fear. The truck's heater clicked on, sending a wave of gentle warmth through the cab. Eleanor tugged her mother's velvet blanket from the back seat. It was too luxurious for the setting, but a bridge between two worlds, and draped it across her shoulders. The fabric felt like stolen treasure, a comfort woven from both her past and her present. Jack glanced over, offering a small, understanding smile. "You did good," he said quietly. Eleanor reached for his hand, roughened by ash and repairs, and gave it a grateful squeeze. "Thank you," she whispered back. Lily curled against the seat, the sketchbook forgotten at her feet, as though the moment demanded full attention, not the distraction of pencils and paper. Jack guided the truck downward, winding through stands of fir and spruce until the chapel's glow vanished behind them. They passed the little market where he'd once stopped for coffee, the school Lily would attend tomorrow, and the bridge where they'd shared so many family picnics. Each landmark felt new in its ordinariness, transformed by Eleanor's radical decision. "Where to now?" Jack asked, voice gentle. Eleanor rested her head against the window, watching the moonlight dance through the trees. Home, she said after a moment, wherever and however we choose to make it. The promise in her tone was soft but unwavering. Jack nodded, understanding she meant not just his cabin at the end of Spruce Lane, but a home built on autonomy and the shared thrill of the unknown. As they turned toward the cabin road, Jack flicked on the radio and a soft country ballad drifted from the speakers. Lily hummed along the melody, weaving itself into the night air. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the music wash over her each note, a reminder that life's sweetest moments often arrived after the fiercest fires. Behind them, the world they'd left of silk and ceremony and carefully scripted lives grew smaller by the mile. Ahead lay the promise of authenticity, a life where choices were hers to make, consequences hers to face, and every breath a testament to her newfound freedom. In the glow of the dashboard lights, Eleanor felt the cage fall away, and for the first time in her 28 years, she discovered the uncharted territory of her true self. The headlights swept over Jack's cabin, just as the moon slipped behind a bank of clouds. Eleanor watched the familiar silhouette, its low roofline settling among wildflower meadows, untended by corporate gardeners, fill her windshield. Jack parked beside the flower truck, the gravel crunching under his tires, and switched off the engine. The world fell into soft silence, broken only by the distant rustle of wind through pine needles. Lily sprang from the passenger seat, her mismatched slippers skidding in the gravel. "Come on," she called over her shoulder, scurrying up the porch stairs. Jack helped Eleanor out of the truck, offering his arm to steady her as she navigated the rough-hewn boards. The cabin door stood ajar, light spilling out like a warm invitation. Inside the living room was awash in amber glow from a single lamp. A woven rag rug lay before a stone hearth, its hearth tools neatly arranged beside a stack of split firewood. Eleanor inhaled the scent of pine smoke brewing stew, and something sweet she couldn't place. Lily dashed to one corner and whisked a fleece robe from a peg near the coat rack. "These are Mommy's old pajamas," she explained, draping the soft flannel around Eleanor's shoulders. "They're big, but you look cozy." Eleanor let the fabric envelop her, its worn softness, a far cry from the French silk and lace she'd shed, and felt a curious flutter of comfort. She followed Lily toward the kitchen where a pot simmered on the stove. Jack stood at the counter stirring a wooden spoon through a thick mix of vegetables and broth. He glanced up and offered her a small, honest smile. "Hot cocoa?" he asked, nodding at a shabby enamel mug on the table. "Yes, please," Eleanor replied, voice tentative and trembling with gratitude. Lily reached for the mug, and Jack poured steaming cocoa, the rich aroma mingling with the stew's savory scent. He handed Eleanor the cup, and she wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat chase the cold from her fingers. The first sip was bittersweet and perfect. Lily pressed her sketchbook into Eleanor's hands. "I drew you," she whispered, eyes bright. Eleanor knelt to see the page, a cabin framed by mountains, a flower truck in the drive, and two stick figures, Jack waving, Lily hugging an oversized teddy bear. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, brushing a tear from her cheek. Lily beamed and returned to her wildflowers. Jack set two mismatched bowls on the table and ladled the stew into them. He slid a plate of thick, crusty bread off a cooling rack, its aroma yeasty and warm. Eleanor took a seat across from him, the pillows on her chair rough but welcoming. They ate in companionable silence, the only sound the spoon's scrape against ceramic, and Lily's soft humming as she rearranged mason jars of daisies on the windowsill. When the bowls were empty, Jack carried them to the sink. Eleanor followed, placing her cocoa mug beside them. She reached for the dish soap, recalling her mother's regimented kitchen where spotless counters were a badge of status. Here, the soapy bubbles felt like freedom. She scrubbed the bowl and traced the curve of the enamel, marveling at how satisfying it was to do something simple, cleaning up after a meal, not preparing for a gala. "You're doing great," Jack said, handing her a towel. Eleanor dried the last fork with gentle care and hung it on a peg. A draft whispered through a crack in the window frame, carrying the scent of meadow grass and distant rain. She closed the window latch, smiling at the way the cabin seemed to come alive with every sound and scent, as if celebrating her presence rather than scrutinizing it. Lily scampered down the hallway, followed by a squawk. Two rescued finches fluttered between the slats of an open aviary, Jack's afternoon project. He'd told Eleanor, though, she'd never imagined a birdcage in a fire captain's home. Lily cradled a small wooden box and set it beside the cage. Their wings were broken, she explained, lank hair brushing her forehead. But they're getting better. One finch hopped to Eleanor's outstretched finger, and she gasped as it pecked gently at the grain. They trust you, Lily said proudly. Eleanor laughed, a soft sound she realized she hadn't used in weeks. She picked up the second bird, feeling its tiny heartbeat against her palm. Jack watched from the kitchen doorway, pride and something warmer in his gaze. Eleanor lowered the bird back into its home and closed the door, the finch's chirps filling the quiet room. It's late, Jack said, glancing at the clock over the stove. You probably need to rest. He led Eleanor down a short hallway to the bedroom, its doorway framed by wildflower wreaths. The room was small. 2 beds, a single dresser, and a window overlooking the meadows, moonlight glinting on dew-laced petals. Lily slid onto the bed opposite Eleanor, hugging a fat stuffed bear. Night-night, she said, stifling a yawn. Eleanor settled beneath a quilt hand-stitched from scraps of forgotten clothing, bits of denim flannel, and cabin scarves that whispered of past winters. The quilt she'd slept under at the Blake estate had been silk and satin, stiff and cold to the touch. Here she felt the hand of every stitch, the pull of every seam, and knew the labor of love that had gone into it. Jack tucked Lily in and kissed her forehead. Then he turned to Eleanor and hesitated as though uncertain what to do next. Eleanor patted the empty space on the bed beside Lily. May I? She asked softly. Jack smiled and sat, the wood slats creaking beneath his weight. He lay one arm across the quilt, close but respectful of Eleanor's space. For a long moment they just sat, listening to the night's orchestra, soft drafts in the walls, the distant cry of an owl. Lily's gentle breathing. Eleanor thought of the chapel's flames, the panic in her chest, and the radical decision to choose this life. Now that she was here, she realized how much she'd missed the absence of prying eyes, the absence of expectation, the absence of pretense. I can't remember the last time I slept through the night, Eleanor admitted, voice a whisper in the hush. Jack nodded. The first few nights in this cabin I woke every hour thinking I heard alarms or cries for help. Took me a while to remember I wasn't at the station anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, ash still clinging to dark strands. I still check on Lily sometimes, even though I know she's right there in bed. Eleanor's gaze lifted to his profile, soft in the lamplight. Thank you for tonight, she said, voice thick. For everything. He turned to her, surprise and kindness mingling in his eyes. You're welcome, he replied quietly. I'm just glad you're safe. Behind them, Lily stirred and mumbled in her sleep. The finite boundaries of their new home felt at once comforting and infinite, 4 walls that contained them, and wild meadows that invited them to explore. Eleanor realized she no longer craved the gilded cages of her past. Here, every moment held genuine risk and honest reward. Every mundane act, washing dishes, feeding birds, patching quilts, was a ritual of choice, not obligation. Jack rose, placing a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Get some rest, he murmured. We'll talk more in the morning. He stepped to the door and paused, offering her a final reassuring smile before slipping into the hallway and down the stairs. Left alone, Eleanor pulled the quilt up to her chin and settled deeper into the bed. Lily's breathing was steady now, her small frame curled like a question mark under layers of blankets. Eleanor closed her eyes, the cabin's warmth and whispered sounds lulling her toward sleep. For the first time in her life, she didn't dread what tomorrow might bring. Instead, she felt calm certainty that whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms, and with allies who valued her for who she truly was. The quilt's patchwork pressed gently against her cheek, a tapestry of choice and chance stitched into a whole. Eleanor exhaled, the night's hush folding around her like a promise. Home was not a place of perfection, but a space where one could breathe freely, laugh without an audience, and grow in the company of those who welcomed every aspect of her imperfect humanity. As sleep claimed her, the wildflower meadows outside whispered of new beginnings yet to bloom. The sun climbed higher each morning, painting Jack's cabin in golden hues that became Eleanor's new alarm clock. Instead of the Blake estate's rigid schedule, her days began with the hum of cicadas and the soft creak of Jack's ancient kitchen door. On her first morning at the town library, Eleanor discovered the world was bigger and smaller than she'd ever known. She'd arrived in stiletto heels and a satin gown, Now she slipped into sensible loafers and faded jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, greeted her with a knowing smile. "Ready for your first shift, Miss Blake." Eleanor supplied, feeling a flush as the name felt both foreign and familiar. "Just call yourself Ellie." Mrs. Henderson said, her voice a warm invitation. "We start by shelving returned books and help with computer queries. No suit required." Shelving books proved surprisingly satisfying. Eleanor ran her fingers along spines of Dickens and Du Maurier, drilling in Dewey Decimal numbers like a code she'd never cracked before. Each correct placement felt like unlocking a miniature triumph. A regular patron, Mr. Thompson, ambled up with a stack of local history tomes. "Mind showing me how to search this archive?" he asked, tapping his cane. Eleanor tapped the keyboard, then clicked and scrolled. "Type Ridgemont Railways," she coached, pointing at results that unfurled the town's forgotten train lines. Mr. Thompson's eyes lit. "My father worked those rails," he said, voice trembling. "Thank you, young lady." She realized then that knowledge carried weight beyond power. It carried connection. After her shift, Jack handed her the keys to the flower truck for her driving lesson. The truck's faded paint creaked in protest as she eased it onto Spruce Lane. Lily sat beside her, clutching the dash. "Easy, Mom." Lily coached, though Jack wasn't far behind in his own pickup. Eleanor gripped the wheel tight, imagining college boardrooms where decisions had been made for her. Now she steered herself. She shifted into second gear, then rolled down a gentle hill. The engine's purr replaced her racing heartbeat. She navigated the curves, passing fields where wildflowers bowed in the breeze. At the chapel, she stopped smoothly. No crisp valet training required. Lily cheered. "Great job," Jack called over the radio. Eleanor wanted to laugh. Driving became a metaphor for her life. Learn the controls, trust yourself, and keep moving forward. Back at the cabin, meals arrived from scratch. Jack handed her a pile of vegetables and a recipe for ratatouille. Eleanor chopped peppers, unevenly garlic, clenching her knife hand. The air filled with the scent of onions caramelizing. She tossed the mixture into bubbling tomato sauce, stirred with a wooden spoon that felt alive in her grip. When dinner landed on the table, Lily dug in with gusto. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You might have a future as a chef," he said. That night, Eleanor brushed through Lily's hair. Her daughter leaned back, eyes drifting closed. As she braided the strands over the act, felt like stitching together her own unraveling confidence. Lily's small whisper. "Thank you, Mom," echoed in Eleanor's chest like a victory bell. On Thursdays, the library hosted a Tech for Seniors hour. Eleanor guided Mrs. Jenkins through email attachments, then showed Mr. Alvarez how to enlarge text on the screen. Watching their slow but determined mastery, Eleanor felt her heart swell. She realized service was more than a slogan. It was an exchange of respect. Weekends brought more adventures. Jack and Lily taught her to tend the rescued finches. Each bird needed gentle hand feeding and careful cage cleaning. Eleanor knelt beside the aviary, heart fluttering with each bird's chirp. The simple trust between creature and caretaker reminded her that vulnerability could be rewarded with loyalty. One afternoon, Jack invited her to help deliver wedding bouquets to a couple wed in a meadow. Eleanor arranged wildflowers in mason jars, her fingers stained with pollen. The bride, radiant in a simple linen dress, clasped Eleanor's hand and said, "This is perfect. No cameras, no pedigrees, just genuine joy." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. In that moment, she understood the difference between performing for applause and creating something that made people feel known. Her evening settled into peaceful rhythm. She read novels borrowed from the library on the porch swing, the pages rustling in the breeze. Sometimes Jack joined her, and they talked about small things, the changing seasons, the wildflowers peeking through gravel, the track of the North Star. Conversation was no longer an exercise in propriety. It was discovery. A month into her new life, Eleanor found a letter on the kitchen table, an apology from the Duke and Blake Foundation asking for her official condition update. She stared at the envelope. Once such correspondence would have sent her into panic deadlines, press releases, familial obligations. Now she crumpled the letter into her palm. She wanted to handwrite her own reply, but even more, she wanted to live free of scripted demands. Beside her, Lily laughed at a joke Jack told. They were a makeshift family weaving new patterns of love and responsibility. Eleanor realized that every choice she'd made recently, from shelving books to cooking dinner, had chipped away decades of expectation. She was learning to live on her own terms. Late that night, she lay in bed, the quilt a patchwork of homegrown stories. She pictured her old bedroom at the Blake estate, immaculate but cold, a stage set. Here, her room smelled of cedar and lavender. Her dreams unstructured and full of possibility. Tomorrow she would wake again to real choices: which shelf to organize, which flower route to take, which recipe to master. As sleep claimed her, Eleanor felt a quiet thrill. She was no longer the heir dressed in legacy. She was Ellie, daughter, mother, friend, creator of her own life. And in the morning light, she would continue learning to live. Eleanor woke before dawn, a habit that no longer felt like obligation, but like eagerness to greet the day's possibilities. She slipped out of the quilt-strewn bed and padded quietly down the hall toward the kitchen. Lily was already seated at the table, her sketchbook open as she traced sketches of wildflowers backlit by early light. Jack stood at the stove, stirring coffee with a thoughtful frown. The aroma of fresh grounds and toasted bread mingled with the morning breeze drifting through the open window. "Morning," Jack said softly, pouring Eleanor a cup. "You look like you have something on your mind." She accepted the mug, its warmth seeping into her palms. "Just something I need to sort out," she replied, forcing a smile. In her purse now, a simple canvas satchel instead of silk clutch, she carried items that defined her new life: library card, driver's license, Lily's school emergency contact. But that morning, a glint at the bottom caught her eye. She reached in, slipped a hand among the contents, and felt the unexpected weight of a small metal box. Jack moved to refill Lily's mug as Eleanor drew the object into the light. It was a sleek tracking device, no bigger than a matchbox, with a blinking LED that she hadn't noticed before. Eleanor's heart stuttered. This wasn't Jill's old phone tracker or Lily's toy locator. It was professional, too professional to be a safety precaution. She held it up. "Jack, what is this, Jack?" Looked over, surprise flickering across his weariness. "Where'd you find that in here?" Eleanor said, tapping her purse's worn interior. "I thought my bag felt heavier." She twisted the device between her fingers, listening to its faint whir. "It's tracking me." Jack placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and protective. "Let's see who it belongs to." He fetched his phone and used a signal reading app to check its frequency. The screen lit up with coordinates pointing to the Blake Estate's remote server farm, a data center his old firehouse had once been called to when a transformer exploded. Eleanor felt bile rise. "Charles," she said, voice tight. "He must have planted this." They exchanged a look heavy with accusation and betrayal. Jack set the tracking device on the table as Lily watched with widened eyes. "He's monitoring you," Eleanor whispered, tears of disbelief welling. "Everywhere I go." Jack's jaw clenched. "That's illegal." He reached for his keys. "We'll take it to the station, file a report." Eleanor shook her head, mind spinning. "No, Jack. I need to know more first." She recognized the urgency of finding the truth before her life was dictated by fear once again. She grabbed her bag and the tracking device, then ushered Jack and Lily into the flower truck. They drove in silence back up Spruce Lane, past the cabin and the dew-drenched meadows, until they reached the chapel's blackened remains. The early sun revealed charred beams jutting against a gray sky, as though the ruins bore witness to something far darker than an accidental fire. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight. She climbed out and sifted through the ashen floorboards, recalling how she'd escaped hours earlier. With gloved hands, she unearthed a fragment of frayed wire, the kind used in professional-grade arson, to bypass safety triggers. The wire ended in a small junction box fused onto the chapel's old electrical panel. She dug around until she found the box, its screws still warm from the fire's heat. Jack set down Lily's hand, his own gear shedding soot, as he knelt beside Eleanor. "This wasn't an accident," she said, lifting the charred wiring. "He wired it to spark at the exact moment of the ceremony, maximum drama. Minimal witnesses injured." Eleanor's voice trembled not from cold, but from rage. "He intended to scare me into obedience. Or worse." Images flashed through her mind, the 3-second hesitation at the altar, Charles's cold smirk, her parents' frantic choreography as they tried to control every aspect of her life. The realization hit like a punch. Charles wasn't a partner. He was a jailer. She stood wiping ash from her hands on her jeans. He wanted to eliminate my resistance, she said, voice quiet but firm. He thought a near-death experience would keep me in line. Jack placed a steady hand on her arm. You're safe now, he said. But we need to decide what comes next. Eleanor looked at the cabin in the distance, her new sanctuary of choice and consequence. She thought of Lily's laughter, the library's gentle rhythm, the freedom she'd found among rescued birds and wildflowers. Charles has lost the right to protect me, she declared, voice carrying across the empty chapel grounds. I'm not going back to that life. She turned to Jack. I need to tell someone I trust, she said. I need a record of this legal proof. Jack nodded and pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed the local sheriff's department, recording his call on speaker. As he spoke, explaining the evidence they'd uncovered. The tracking device. The wiring Eleanor's fiancé's controlling behavior. Lily hugged her legs, silent but resolute in her support. When the sheriff arrived, Jack handed over the evidence, the device, the charred wiring Eleanor's testimony. Eleanor stood tall beside him. No longer the trembling bride, but a woman reclaiming her own narrative. The sheriff listened, eyebrows raised in solemn understanding, then promised a full investigation. As the deputies bagged the evidence and measured the damage to the electrical system, Eleanor wandered among the collapsed pews, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Each breath felt like liberation, her own heartbeat, her only judge. She thought of Charles waiting at the Blake estate, his calls and texts unanswered on her silenced phone. He would never understand this world of real consequences and genuine care. Jack joined her, handing her Lily's sketchbook. On the inside cover, Lily had drawn two figures holding hands beneath a cabin roof with beams of sunlight and a banner reading home. Eleanor felt tears slip free, but these were tears of triumph, not fear. She closed the sketchbook and tucked it into her bag, determined to replace every tracking device and spy cam with memories she chose freely. As the sun climbed higher, Eleanor and Jack walked away from the ruined chapel together, Lily skipping between them. The path led not back to tradition or coercion, but forward into a life shaped by her own choices. Betrayal had been revealed and confronted. Now each new step was one she would take with open eyes, her passions and freedoms leading the way. In the distance, the wildflower meadows beckoned their colors brighter for her newfound clarity, an endless field of possibilities waiting to be claimed. Eleanor pushed open the cabin door just after sunrise, the pale light filling the room with quiet possibility. Jack sat at the rough-hewn kitchen table, empty mug in hand, staring at the scattered evidence before him. The small tracking device, the charred wiring, and her written notes detailing Charles's betrayal. Lily still slept, curled beneath the quilt in the next room, trusting the morning to bring her mother's return. Jack looked up, his dark eyes reflecting both pride and worry. You found everything, he asked, softly gesturing to the evidence laid out like a crime scene in miniature. Eleanor nodded, pulling a chair around to face him. She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the weight of what had happened settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of hard-won truth. I did, she said, and I talked to the sheriff. They'll handle it from here, Jack exhaled, running a hand through the ash still clinging to his hair. Good. I'm sorry I tried to keep you from it. I only wanted to protect you. A flicker of pain crossed Eleanor's face. I know, she replied quietly, and I'm grateful in many ways you taught me what protection can mean, but I needed to stand on my own. Jack's shoulders slumped fractionally, the reality settling in that his instincts as a rescuer sometimes clashed with her need for autonomy. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I don't want to lose you, he admitted, voice low. I care about you so much I can't think straight sometimes. Tears threatened to spill, but Eleanor blinked them back. She reached across the table and placed a gentle hand atop his. The contrast was striking her soft fingers against his calloused knuckles. I don't want to lose you either, she said. But love isn't about wrapping someone in cotton wool. I need room to breathe, to make mistakes, to choose my own path, even if that path leads me away from you at times. Jack swallowed hard, the tension in his jaw easing as he acknowledged her truth. You're right, he said, nodding slowly. I've been trying to fight your battles, but sometimes the bravest thing is to let you face them yourself. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Exactly. She paused, eyes flicking to the window, where sunlight danced on the wildflower meadow beyond. I'm moving into the apartment above the bakery today. It's closer to the library, and I can afford it on my salary. The words felt foreign, yet exhilarating as they passed her lips. Jack's gaze followed hers, picturing the small building with its pastel storefront and the scent of morning bread wafting through open windows. He nodded, a bittersweet smile tugging at his mouth. I think you'll like it there, he said. You deserve a place that's entirely yours. Eleanor stood and began gathering her things, the tracking device, a framed photo of Lily's sketch of the cabin, a small stack of her favorite library novels. Each item represented a shard of her new identity. Jack rose as well, moving to help her. He handed her the photo first. Keep this, he said. No matter where you go, you're part of this family. She hugged him tightly, pressing her cheek against his soot-streaked jacket. And you're part of mine, she whispered. Lily's soft footsteps echoed down the hall, and Jack braced himself as his daughter appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mom, Lily asked, voice thick with slumber. She clutched the quilt around her shoulders. When she saw Eleanor's packed bag, her eyes widened. Are you leaving? Eleanor knelt, opening her arms. Lily ran into her embrace. I'm not going far, she said, stroking Lily's hair. Just above the bakery so I can work at the library and still tuck you in every night. Lily stuck out her bottom lip. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too, Eleanor promised, planting a kiss on Lily's forehead. But I'll be back to help you with breakfast, I swear. Jack watched his heart both breaking and swelling with pride. He stepped forward, ruffling Lily's hair. You'll make Mommy's place cozy, he said. I might help with some flower arrangements for her windowsill. Lily giggled, wiping her eyes. Okay, Daddy. Eleanor tucked the last novel into her bag and stood. She turned back to Jack, their eyes meeting across the small kitchen table, and she felt the pulse of possibility between them. Thank you for everything, she said. Jack nodded, wiping his hand on a dish towel. Thank you for teaching me when to step back. They embraced one final time, different from the urgency of rescue, and more like the embrace of partners acknowledging each other's strengths and limits. Eleanor pulled away, picked up Lily's hand, and led her to the door. Jack lingered, watching them shoulder to shoulder as they stepped into the crisp morning air. He closed the cabin door behind them and slipped back inside. The silence felt sacred, a pause between what had been and what was to come. He walked to the table and picked up the tracking device, then the wiring fragment tokens of betrayal that had set both of them free. With a decisive flick, he dropped them into the fireplace's cold hearth, imagining the blaze that would never come. Outside, Eleanor and Lily walked arm in arm to the bakery across the lane. Windows glowed with the warm promise of baked bread and new beginnings. Eleanor paused on the stoop, turning once to wave at Jack's cabin silhouetted against the dawn. He waved back, small but steady. In that moment, Eleanor felt the quiet power of standing on her own, the knowledge that love could survive distance, that protection need not suffocate independence, and that every choice she made would be her own. She took Lily's hand and stepped through the door into her new home, ready for a life of her own design. Eleanor had just finished helping Mr. Nguyen navigate the library's new catalog system when she heard a shy voice at her elbow. Miss Ellie. She turned to see Lily standing there, wide-eyed, clutching something rolled in her small fist. The child's mismatched socks peeked out from under a skirt, way too big, and her cheeks still bore remnants of morning cocoa. Eleanor offered her a warm smile. Hey, kiddo, what are you doing here after school? Lily's lower lip quivered. I have something for you. She unfurled a crumpled sheet of paper, the edges smeared with purple crayon. I drew it. Eleanor took it, gently smoothing the creases. Across the top in Lily's neat rounded letters were 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Dad, a shorter one beside him labeled Lily, and another figure labeled Eleanor. Beneath them the words, Come home, please. Eleanor's heart lurched. Around them the library's hum of quiet conversation and turning pages seemed to fade away. She looked up at Lily, her bright, earnest eyes fixed on Eleanor's face, waiting. The child's plea was simple, but it reverberated through Eleanor's chest like a bell. Come home, her daughter had written. Please. A wave of emotion flooded Eleanor's cheeks. She knelt to Lily's level, brushing a stray curl from the girl's forehead. "Oh, honey," she whispered, voice thick. "This is beautiful." She folded Lily into a gentle embrace, her arms tight around the small frame. Lily buried her face against Eleanor's shoulder, nodding into the softness of Eleanor's sweater. Nearby, a few patrons glanced over Mrs. Henderson behind the desk, offered a sympathetic smile recognizing the moment's tenderness. Eleanor pulled back and took a steadying breath. "Thank you for this," she said, smoothing Lily's hair. "It means more than you know." Lily wiped her tears with the back of her hand and gripped Eleanor's hand with determination. "I miss you here," she said. "And Dad misses you too." Eleanor's eyes fell to the sketch, to the simple names and shapes that captured a family's essence better than any photograph or formal portrait ever could. Eleanor rose, lifting Lily into her arms. "Let's go get some ice cream," she suggested, brushing away the last of her tears with a quick blink. Lily brightened immediately. As they walked past the shelves, Lily waved the drawing at Mrs. Henderson. "She's coming back, right?" The librarian called out, voice gentle. Eleanor offered a nod and a grateful smile. "I'll definitely be here," she promised. Outside, the afternoon air was crisp, the sky brushed with the soft pastels of early evening. Eleanor held Lily's hand as they crossed the street to Rosie's Creamery, the little shop with the hand-painted sign and the bell that tinkled when you opened the door. They chose 2 scoops of strawberry and waffle cones, and Eleanor watched Lily savor each bite, her freckled nose wrinkling in delight as pink dripped onto her chin. Eleanor let the warmth of the cone seep into her fingers as she thought about the words on that drawing. "Come home, please." It wasn't just a request to return to Jack's cabin at the end of Spruce Lane. It was a child's longing for unity and witness, a glimpse of what family meant when love, rather than protocol or protection, was at its core. That evening, Eleanor hung Lily's drawing on her fridge above the little kitchenette in her apartment above the bakery. The cramped space was functional, a single bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a combined living kitchen area furnished with thrift store finds. But to Eleanor it was home, her own domain, where she chose every color on the walls, every meal she cooked, every book she read. Yet amid her independence, the plea from Lily reminded her that autonomy and connection were not mutually exclusive. Later, with Lily tucked in at the neighbor's spare bedroom and the little apartment silent except for the hum of night insects through the open window, Eleanor leaned against the counter. She traced the crayon lines under glass-taped protection. Beneath the image of her family, she saw hope and vulnerability entwined. She pulled out her phone and stared at Jack's name saved in her contacts. Jack Dawson, hero dad. She didn't call. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the memory of Lily's handshake, Jack's steady presence, and the soft glow of cabin lamplight wash over her. Family wasn't about walls or addresses. It was about bearing witness, watching each other grow, making space for mistakes, and returning when called. Eleanor flicked off the light and climbed into her own bed. Dawn would bring new challenges, work at the library, flower deliveries beside Jack's truck, cooking classes, school events for Lily. But tonight, she felt whole. The crayon drawing shimmered in her mind, a simple plea that reminded her standing on her own had taught her strength. Coming home taught her love. And as she drifted to sleep, Eleanor knew that tomorrow she would embrace both with all the courage and compassion she had found. Sunlight streamed through the canopy of maple leaves as Jack navigated the winding stretch of rural road toward Pinehurst Farm. The scent of fresh-cut hay mingled with the wildflowers that lined the path, a living testament to the free-spirited celebrations he, Eleanor, and Lily now crafted together. A hand-painted sign at the driveway's entrance read, "Dawson and Blake Celebrations, Your Story, Your Way." The banner draped across weathered posts fluttered in a breeze that felt like promise. Eleanor sat beside him in the passenger seat of their renovated flower truck, clipboard balanced on her knee. She tapped her pen against a carefully sketched seating chart. The Meriwether Voss wedding, she mused. Smiling at the couple's names requires mismatched vintage china and bluebonnets alongside the chapel ruins. She traced the curve of a table layout, her mind dancing with possibilities. The bride, a local artist who painted murals under streetlights, had requested no ivory aisle runner or frilly bouquets, just authentic elements to tell her story. Eleanor's heart swelled. This was exactly the kind of wedding she had dreamed of planning, unbound by tradition and rich with personal meaning. Lily sat on the truck's running board, camera in hand, legs swinging as she shot angles of the farmhouse's stone walls. Each click captured candid emotion, the way a groomsman steadied his cufflinks, the flower girl chasing butterflies across the lawn, the grandmother examining her daughter's painted bouquet with misty eyes. Lily's photographs had become the company's secret signature images that spoke of life unfolding naturally, much like the wild meadows she'd once sketched under Jack's watchful eye. They arrived at the barn, its red paint worn by seasons of sun and snow. Inside, long wooden tables gleamed under Edison bulbs, and hay bales were draped with quilted blankets for casual seating. Jack hopped out, adjusting his tool belt and running a quick safety check on the fire extinguishers and first aid kit. In 5 years as a fire captain, then flower delivery man, he'd learned that every celebration needed thorough contingency plans just in case. Eleanor admired his meticulous nature, which balanced her creative whims and ensured that spontaneity seldom tipped into chaos. Jack pulled a crate of eucalyptus sprigs from the truck bed and called to the venue's caretaker, who had helped convert an old apple press into a drink station draped in burlap. "These go on the arbor," Jack instructed, handing over the fragrant greenery. Then he tested the camp lanterns hung above the dance floor, flicking each on and off to confirm the wiring's integrity. His hands moved with practiced ease, leaving no detail unattended. Eleanor watched him for a moment, remembering the first morning she'd arrived here, still groggy with uncertainty, clutching Lily's crayon drawing of Dad, Lily, and Eleanor. Jack had welcomed them, offering her mismatched pajamas and life's small rituals. Now they stood as equals in a partnership forged through smoke betrayal and reclaimed autonomy. She unlocked the barn doors for the caterers and handed off final vendor payments, her checkbook organized in color-coded sections that would have once impressed any boardroom but now only delighted her clients. Upstairs, Lily crouched on a hay bale, adjusting her lens to capture the barn's rafters strung with lanterns and ribbons that fluttered like dancers. She preferred real moments over staged poses. The shy kiss behind a quilted backdrop, the ring bearer lost in reverie with his stuffed bunny, the tearful hug between a mother and daughter, hearkening back to Eleanor's own journey. Each shot was a testament to Dawson and Blake's ethos, authenticity above all. By mid-afternoon, the Merriweather Voss party began to arrive, friends from art school, local farmers, a few city émigrés seeking rustic charm. They greeted Eleanor with genuine warmth, unhurried by formal protocols. Eleanor shepherded them to the refreshment stand where lemonade was served in mason jars and a vintage phonograph played Audrey Hepburn songs. The bride's mother, a floral artist in her own right, marveled at Lily's blooms arranged in milk glass, mismatched to each table's color palette. "Your daughter has an eye," she told Jack. He beamed with fatherly pride. Eleanor slipped away to address a last-minute concern. The cake toppers had arrived slightly off-center. She straightened the hand-carved figures of the bride and groom, ensuring the groom's paint didn't scrape against the frosting. Nearby, the DJ tested the speakers for the first dance. Eleanor overheard him ask if he should start with a classic waltz or something more upbeat. She walked over, gently tapping his shoulder. "They wanted street band jazz, remember?" she reminded him. He grinned and switched to a lively New Orleans brass track, the notes rolling through the barn like sunlight through stained glass. Outside, Jack joined Eleanor and leaned against the barn post. He offered her a tumbler of iced tea, its amber depths cool against their palms. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said, voice soft with contentment. Eleanor sipped and nodded, watching Lily photograph a giggling group of cousins chasing fireflies in the meadow's edge. "It does," she agreed. "We're building something that matters." She raised her glass in a silent toast. Jack touched her glass with his. "To second chances," he said, recalling the fire that had brought them together and the autonomy Eleanor had fiercely claimed. "And to chosen families." Eleanor's eyes gleamed as she clinked his glass. Lily bounded up, breathless from discovery. "Mom, Dad, come see!" she exclaimed, tugging them toward the old apple orchard behind the barn. Lanterns hung from the branches, illuminating a rustic wooden altar draped in mismatched lace and wildflowers. The Merriweather Voss ceremony was intimate. No grandsire in tails pacing the aisles. No maidens grimly reciting predetermined vows. Instead, the couple spoke freely. promises of creativity, of supporting each other's art, of allowing mistakes with kindness. Eleanor stepped forward to hand the bride a simple wreath of daisies Lily had woven that morning, and Jack stood at her side ready in case someone fainted or the branches overhead decided to rain petals. After the vows, Jack escorted the mother of the bride to a seat near the front row, and Eleanor collected Lily in her arms. The ceremony's hush was broken only by the wind in the orchard and the soft promise of love unconstrained by tradition. Then the crowd erupted into applause, real applause, from hearts unburdened by obligation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Merriweather Voss family gathered for dinner beneath strings of lanterns. Eleanor delivered a heartfelt speech thanking everyone for trusting Dawson and Blake to honor their story. Jack's bouquets were arranged at each table, their petals a fragrant nod to new beginnings. Lily's photographs played on a vintage projector, ghostly images flickering on a barn wall capturing laughter tears and the unguarded moments that made the day unforgettable. When the last guest bid farewell, the three of them lingered amid the nest of chairs and scattered petals. Jack packed the remaining flowers into their truck, humming a melody he'd once played on piano. Lily scrolled through her camera, selecting the best shots for social media and tomorrow's scrapbook. Eleanor tucked stray ribbons into her pocket and gathered the leftover fairy lights, each act a small victory of planning and presence. They climbed into the truck together, Jack at the wheel, Eleanor beside him. Lily between them, head cushioned against Eleanor's shoulder. The engine rumbled to life, and they headed down the gravel driveway toward Spruce Lane. Cool night air washed over them, scented with earth and celebration. As they passed the quiet cabins and meadows, Eleanor looked at her family. A former fire captain turned event safety expert, a once gilded heir, now a planner of authentic joy, and a bright-eyed child capturing life's genuine beauty. In that moment, Eleanor realized that from the ashes of expectation they had forged a legacy of choice and compassion. The road ahead would hold new challenges, book signings at the library, next season's wedding fairs, school recitals. But they would meet them together, each contributing talents honed by struggle and freedom. Lily lifted her camera and snapped a quick photo of them all leaning out the truck windows, grins wide and unself-conscious wildflowers a blur in the background. They laughed as the flash lit the cab, and Eleanor felt her heart swell with purpose. They were not bound by the scripts of tradition or the strictures of protocols. They were a family chosen bound by the willingness to grow, to protect, without suffocating, and to celebrate each other's true selves. As the road unwound into darkness, the truth shone brighter than any lantern, guiding them onward toward new celebrations, new stories, and the enduring courage to begin again.